One is laying out the lay of the land. I think for this week, we want to talk about what we've been noticing in the office as far as like particular case management examples of like how things start, where they go as far as like the pathway towards healing for some of these kids, what that looks like, what parents can be on the lookout for and expect, what it means, why sometimes it looks different than you would expect. And then we want to be able to give you guys tangible things to not only be able to observe, but also things to do at home to help further along your kids. In particular, we're going to be talking about autism and some just neurodevelopmental challenges, but more on the line of like the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
And particularly around speech and behavior. There's going to be a couple topics we're going to hit on. We also have a couple things at home that you're going to be able to do that are very easy, tangible, fun things that your kids can do that is going to be helpful for their neurological development and helping with, particularly with kids who struggle with change, like being able to handle change, and also with speech delays and whatnot. And then the last thing that we'll talk about, this will most likely be at the point where we're in just the school. So if you want to know about these things, we're going to talk about different things like vitamins, because we have a lot of people asking questions about vitamins and some different supplement brands or things that maybe they're not brands at all, things that you can just create at home. It's my favorite way to do it. But yeah, that's kind of like the lay of the land. Does that sound like fun?
So we're covering a lot of stuff today.
Yes, we are.
I love it. The first thing that I want to start off with is some really cool stuff that we've been seeing in the office recently, but of course since we've started seeing neurodivergent kids for over a year now. So some of the biggest things that people come in the office looking for is help with their kids when it comes to speech and then behavior, specifically with interacting with other kids. Because it depends on what the diagnosis is, but typically with kids that are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, sometimes severe ADD or ADHD, we're seeing a significant speech delay where they're nonverbal and not always with the same kids, but they're also not interactive. Right? Mm-hmm. They just kind of are in their own world. They're not interacting with mom, dad, siblings, really anybody or anything, just because their nervous systems are in such a state of fight or flight. And so what's so cool is what we've seen recently. These kids come in specifically with speech. They'll go from nonverbal, and then very quickly we see that they start to verbalize more. Not necessarily words right away, but they'll start to babble a lot more, which is just incredible when we talked about dysautonomia, right? When it comes to the disafferentation, where the brain and the body aren't connected properly. And when we're removing that stress in the nervous system, when the brain starts getting the proper information from the body, we see them go out of this state of protection into a state where they're starting to build these new neural pathways when it comes to integrating the speech center. And they start babbling a lot. And with that, they also start interacting a lot more. I had 2 parents last week, they had their kids, they had their first adjustment. And within 2 visits, these kids that were just not interacting with anyone were starting to play with their dolls. They were starting to interact with the family pets, because that's something that we've noticed is they won't even interact with the dogs or cats or anything like that. They started interacting with the pets, and then they started like interacting with kids at school. Just a few visits, which is just incredible. And I think the thing that pops into my mind is it's like when your computer has like 15 different tabs open. Like when these kids come in, their computer, there's 15 different tabs open. There's a YouTube video playing. There's music coming from somewhere. You don't know where it is. There's just so much going on that the computer's just overloaded, right? And so in order for you to learn how to speak or how to interact with these kids, you'd have to close some of those tabs. And until we're helping their nervous systems take a breath for the first time, it's almost impossible to get there. And I just think it's one of the most amazing things. I just wanted to talk about it. And specifically when it comes to how sometimes these changes can look bad, which is funny, right? Because you'd think that we would, it would only be an uphill thing, and it is, but sometimes parents will be like, wow, they're a lot more sensitive now to certain sounds, or they're a lot more sensitive to certain things. Well, it's because now they're just not living in chaos.
Yeah. Or maybe their personality comes out a lot more and they're like hyperactive, or they look more chaotic and whatnot. Whereas before, a lot of times people start off, their kids start off in this place where they're nonverbal, non-interactive, like kind of like a shell of themselves. In school, if they are in school, they do kind of sit by themselves. They don't interact. And then they go from that to maybe they're babbling, which is great. But then now you're getting calls from the school and be like, hey, he's really overactive and we were unable to get him to sit down and he ended up having to get, a disciplinary action of some sort. And you're getting these calls and you're like, oh man, is he getting worse? It's like, no, this is actually a good thing. It means that his nervous system is coming out of this shell, closed off, lacking interacting with the world around him, and that's just an incredible thing, but challenging.
And you were talking to me about the fear paralysis reflex.
And
how that's one of the most deep-rooted primitive reflexes. So tell me
more
about that.
So primitive reflexes, we talk about this a lot, but like one of the most deeply seated reflex is something called the fear paralysis reflex, which is in a sense, it's like if you have a baby and you startle them, the very first thing that they do is like this, they'll do a moral reflex where they'll come out like that, but internally they are like frozen. And then they go through that frozen nature and then they go through the rest of the moral reaction where they're crying and whatnot. But that frozen initial reflex is called the fear paralysis reflex, which is literally when you're afraid, you get paralyzed and it's reflexive. If that is like the most foundational primitive reflex, arguably, and once these kids start getting adjusted, they start getting regulated, they're doing things at home and the nervous system is getting healed, that reflex will start to integrate on its own because the nervous system is getting this proper neurological input. But when the fear paralysis reflex goes away, they're no longer paralyzed and frozen, which means they come out of that and they actually start being overactive compared to what you're used to. And so you'll get these kids who are actually healing, but they look like, for at least a moment during their healing process, they get very hyperactive. And we see that a lot, particularly with nonverbal autism, because the nonverbal autism is one of the more intense versions of these neurodevelopmental struggles, and they almost all have that same foundational primitive reflex issue. So getting that to go away is a good thing, but it does show itself as a challenging behavioral issue, obsessive, oppositional defiance, or something along those lines, depending on the age of the child. But
because essentially their nervous systems have been not in a fight or flight mode, but like in a freeze mode, which
Correct,
is the most significant part of the fight or flight response.
Exactly, yeah.
And so as they come out of that, we're seeing the babbling increase, which eventually will get to a point where they're speaking, right? That's the goal, right? Because at the top of neurological development, it's a pyramid, right? Speech is at the top, and as we start to lay the framework and the foundation to get there, they'll get there. But you were talking to me also about adventure play.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that as far as like the tactical things they can do at home. But let's go a little bit back first, and just what I think is important is everybody understands like neurology, what's the ground level of what we're dealing with here. So autism is a definable thing. It is a spectrum, but what we want to understand of it is a neurodevelopmental or neuroinflammatory issue that particularly affects the right side of the brain. So when you have the two hemispheres of the brain, the right brain is responsible for things like socialization, big picture thinking, creativity, but it also coordinates things like being able to have normal eye contact, social awareness, all those things that you would say, okay, if you looked at a child who was diagnosed autistic or diagnosed with autism, they don't look you in the eye, they aren't able to actually know personal space and personal boundaries, they're very fixated on singular individual things, but they don't really see the big picture of things. It's just the opposite of that, right? So if their right brain is where the deficiency is, it's going to show itself as autism. Now, as neurodevelopmental hierarchies go, we know the right brain is going to be developed between 0 and 3 years old. The reason that vast majority of autism is diagnosed between 2 to 3 years old typically is because it's at the end of that cascade of brain development where it's just rapid amount of nervous system growth. And at that stage is typically where they get introduced to the vast majority of their stressors, which are going to be physical, chemical, and emotional. And then on top of that, you have antibiotics, you have other emotional stressors, you got physical stressors, you got things that preceded the age 2 to 3 as well, things that happen in utero all the way from infancy. It's a large list, but the reason why that 0 to 3 years old is so important, because it correlates so closely to that autism diagnosis, is just simply because that's the part of the brain that's being grown. Once we have a damage there, so to say, or at least a dysfunction, a dysregulation, a disorganization, whatever word you want to use, in that right side of the brain, you're going to get the presentation of autism. So then what we want to do is create the foundational building blocks to get back to building that right side of the brain up again. We've talked about these a lot, and we'll continue to reiterate them. But one of the things that we don't talk about enough is something called adventure play. So when you have a child who is, typically between the ages of 3 to 7, 8, 9 years old, there is a ton of room for them to have enough coordination of their body and opportunity for imagination that you can literally place them either in your living room or outside ideally. And when they're presented with just a yard and a ball and maybe some flowers, their brain has to now make the activity fun for themselves, which is now forcing the right side of the brain to activate. So the left side of the brain is going to be them being able to just look at the intricacies of the ball and look at the intricacies of the flower. But then combining these two things together and combining that they're outside and there's a big field that they can maybe run from point A to point B, and putting that all together is activating the right side of the brain, and it's fun for a kid to do. So giving them opportunities to do that is going to build the right side of the brain, which is ultimately our goal with helping with these children with autism, and particularly with our goal here with regards to our community, is I want to be able to teach parents the easiest, most fun ways to do these, as opposed to just constantly hammering specific therapies and, speech therapy, OT, and whatnot. Not that none of those are wrong or anything, but we want to create something that's easy for families to implement, and one of them is just adventure play. Obviously, cautionary, keep an eye on your kids. Don't let them hurt themselves. Depending on the severity and ability of your child, have enough supervision for them. But the big idea is get them to use their creative mind that's vastly weakened, which what you're going to run into is if you start off doing this, they're not going to be very good at it. And that's okay. They're going to get frustrated, and they're going to probably run over to you and look for you to be able to entertain them or solve their problem or whatnot. Your inclination needs to be to basically push them off of you and get them to entertain themselves, and that'll help build that side of the brain. And then, again, it's hard in the beginning, and it gets easier over time. But that's one of the best, not talked about enough tools, in my opinion, to help them with that.
One of the coolest things about adventure play, too, is it also forces them to make decisions. And because a lot of kids, especially when they're having these struggles, they're just pretty much led all the time. So we have to do this, we have to do this, you have to follow these instructions. And so we see kids that get to the teenage years and they've just never really made any decisions, right? They've just kind of been led. And so adventure play, they have to make decisions. There's a dragon in that castle over there. Are we going to storm through the front gates, or are we going to go around the back and scale up the mountain to get in? It's fun decisions, but it seems silly, but it's really building that foundational work so that they can also gain confidence later in themselves, which is massively important. And again, making those quick decisions, right? We can't sit here and perseverate about it all day. We have to, continue the story. And also, it's working with the speech center as well, because as they're going through these adventures and scenarios and creative things in their head, they're likely talking out loud about it. They're explaining what they're doing. They're creating dialogue that they're talking about, which is powerful. Yeah, even if it's to themselves, internal monologue, right, or they're babbling and you don't understand what they're saying, but typically if they're out by themselves enough and they start to talk to themselves. Yeah. The other thing that's important is that if you're outside in particular, this is just such a small thing, but it can be big, they're going to fall and tumble and roll, and it requires their vestibular system to handle that scenario.
that is building the foundational blocks that will eventually lead to the cascade of events that will get to the point where you can actually grow the speech center of the brain, which is one of our ultimate goals for these kids. So playing outside with uneven ground, particularly if you're in the yard and there's you're barefoot, ideally it's sun shining. All these inputs to the nervous system are all really healing, building block inputs. And from your perspective, if you don't know what's going on, it just looks like your kid's outside. And like, you might not think much about that, but that's one of the best healing things you can do, is just simply give them outside and away from a screen that is just playing a video that is designed to hit their dopamine systems and continue to keep them hooked on it, so they just swipe to the next one and whatnot. So if we can give one big PSA that we probably do all the time, is just getting your child that has autism off of screens is one of the most impactful things that you can do, and to replace it with something that they actually would enjoy, and that's going outside. Because if you just remove something and you leave an empty void, they'll just fill it with something else. So replacing that void with a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we got about 5 more minutes here on our Instagram and TikTok live, and then we're going to be continuing the conversation over into school. So first of all, if you are watching this on Instagram or TikTok, and you are not a member of our Regulated Kids school community, it is a free community, and it is designed to help you build a home that is as healing as possible, so that you don't just feel like the only healing that happens is in the 4 walls of a clinic or a therapist or a doctor's office. I'm sure there is great healing that happens there, but we want you to build your 4 walls to be the most healing, because your kids spend more time there, obviously. Inside of that community, if you join completely for free, there is a lot of free resources available to you. We have a whole home audit that you can create and go through and see step by step where in your home is there something that you can improve on, where you're doing well, where are things that can be changed to help the nervous system of your child. We have a couple extra bonus guides in there on how to create this super nourishing homemade beet stock. It's going to be super nourishing for the child's gut. And then also included in that is the homemade yogurts. So these are just simple like kitchen things that you can do, and it's these yogurts and the stocks are not just something you can just buy. You have to make them. They're very easy to make. We have the guide to build it into it, and that is super nourishing. It's like a huge unlock. The kids love it. It's delicious. So that's just a taste of what's in there. It's like we want to make everything in there as easy to implement, but also as impactful on your kid as possible, and to make it just something that doesn't exist anymore. I don't see it anywhere else, so we wanted to create it there. So that's everything you get, and there's more, because you can be seeing on the discussion boards all the things that we're posting. Yeah. That's free. If you want to see the rest of our conversation here and all the other conversations that we've had or will have, we will have all these in our live calls that you can access on school itself, or all the recordings in the classroom. We have a section for all our office hours. That is the premium version of the school. So if you wanted to come in and see those immediately, you just go to the premium monthly payment of $29 a month. And then the last thing is we have in the classroom is a big, something I spent way too much time on, but it is our at-home program that is 12 modules long, very in-depth, that goes into how to actually build a regulated home from A to Z. Not only things in the kitchen that we talked about, but even more, and then other things that are not just the kitchen. So kind of want to look at it from every room of your household, like how can we improve each of those things, the kitchen being one of them, but there's others. That, if you were to join the premium version and just pay the annual price instead of the monthly price, so instead of $29 a month, you do $199 a year, which comes out to $16 a month or something. You get that whole thing for free, because that thing is normally $399. So it's up to you what you want to do, but these are all the resources that we have in there for you, and we hope that you find it useful. We put a lot of heart and effort into it. Yeah. But yeah, so that is that. So click the link. It'll take you to the About page. You can read all about it. You can join for free. You can do the premium version, and you can pay annual if you want extra bonus of that amazing at-home program that we built.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Cool.
Awesome, guys. Let's go. School's in session.
School's in session.